Good morning, everyone. I'm Christy Sommerfeld, Regional Services Librarian at the Northern New York Library Network in Potsdam, New York. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you for joining us for the ESLN Services webinar series. In today's session, we'll be hearing about New York State Historic Newspapers from Chuck Henry, who has been the technical project lead since 2013. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of some housekeeping. We will be utilizing the chat as well as the Q&A feature for this webinar. We'd appreciate it if you could change your settings so that your messages are going to everyone rather than hosts and panelists. You can change this by opening your chat box and clicking on the drop-down menu above the text box. Feel free to introduce yourself there now. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions so they don't get lost in the chat. You can find that towards the bottom center of your screen. Our presenter will be taking questions after their presentation. Live captioning is available for this webinar. To toggle the subtitles on or off, click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and choose either show subtitle or hide subtitle. This webinar will be recorded and a link to the recording will be shared in the next few days. The email containing the link will also provide information about getting a certificate of attendance. The forms to both request a certificate of attendance and evaluate this webinar will also be posted in the chat towards the end of this session. If you're interested in more sessions in the ESLN Services webinar series, you can visit the ESLN website, and we will put a link to that in the chat. If you are unfamiliar with ESLN, this refers to Empire State Library Network, an organization comprising the 9 reference and research library resources councils, each a multi-type library system in the New York State. ESLN's unique structure provides support for libraries and archives of all types and sizes into a statewide platform for shared services and collaborations. To spread the word about the work we're doing on behalf of New York libraries, we have scheduled webinars with staff and service providers on the last Friday of each month at 10 a.m. This is the second of a 9-part series exploring the various services ESLN has to offer. We'll be covering such topics as New York Heritage, Ask the Lawyer, Empire Library Delivery, and more. You must register for each webinar separately, and they are free and open to all. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Chuck Henry.
Yay!
I almost made it.
Hi, everybody. It is super snowy here in Canton, New York. We're under a winter storm warning here, and it is snowing sideways. If you hear a plow go by, I apologize. I will try to repeat what I'm saying as I go by. It's very loud. So anyway, let's go ahead and start talking about some newspapers. Give me just a moment to share my screen and get a slideshow going. Hopefully you all can see that just fine. And let's go ahead and get started. So as she said, my name is Chuck Henry. I am the technical lead for this project since 2013. Today, I am not going to be spending a lot of time showing you how to use the site. Instead, we'll be talking about some of the behind the scenes things about the newspaper site. Consider this a glimpse under the hood about the project, how it came to be, and also about how you can get involved in this project. Okay, so here is the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the project, where we come from. I think it's important to mention because it shapes what you're looking at when you go to the site and you see the site. It also shapes a little bit about our services as well. And so we're going to talk about the services that we offer. There's 3 of them primarily. And then we're going to talk about how you can get involved. And the last thing up, of course, is question and answers. I have some questions that were pre-submitted, and so I have those available. And as was said before, save your questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll hit some of those when we get to that part of the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the project. Back in the 70s and 80s, for you old timers that are on the call, you'll remember that there was an awful lot of money being thrown around to preserve historical newspapers. Newspapers are, because they're printed usually on really thin paper or pulp paper or lower quality paper, again, to save costs when distributing the newspaper, they are pretty fragile, and they continue to be fragile. And so there was money put forth to preserve those papers, to do archival work on those newspapers. And so what ended up happening is that all of a sudden in the 70s and 80s, there was a bunch of microfilm everywhere. Everybody had microfilm kicking around. Most public libraries, most academic libraries suddenly had oodles of film everywhere. John Hammond, who is our executive director, and I say our, referring to the Northern New York Library Network. So we're in the northern counties of New York State. He was asking his members, what types of things can we do to support you, as one does as the director of the network? And the answer he kept getting from people was, we have all this microfilm and it's awful to deal with. And it's awful, I'm sure all of you are familiar with microfilm, it's awful to deal with because most people off the street haven't an experience with anything in their lives that would match that. So if you're an amateur genealogist coming into a library wanting to look at newspapers, you'd have to learn how to use a microfilm machine. You'd have to learn how to handle microfilm. And the only place to do that is off your library staff. So your library staff now needs to be trained and dedicated and pushed into handling these requests from the public. And it's kind of a pain, and it's labor intensive. It requires some attention. And so that was always like this undercurrent of this idea that microfilm is great to have, but it's hard to maintain. It's hard to make sure it's okay. It's hard to train people to use all of these issues. And so John thought at the time, because this is in the early 2000s, that maybe there was a path forward in digitizing this microfilm and putting it online. This was at the early start of the Web 2.0 era. And so it was this idea that maybe we could do this. And so that's where we started, was the idea that we are providing easy access to these historic newspapers. And that was an important part of that. So we've always been, from the very beginning, an access project. We're trying to increase access to historic newspapers. So back in 2004, we finally launched a newspaper site, and we called it the Northern New York Historic Newspapers. It was a very popular site. We used a search engine content management system called DT Search. It was a pretty good way of doing it. It was a full text Boolean search of PDFs. And so we just threw PDFs in a giant folder, and people could search through them and view newspapers. And it was extremely popular at the time. It had some weaknesses. One of the weaknesses was you couldn't search by date. You just typed in the name you were looking for and you hoped for the best. We kept adding newspaper pages from primarily our membership. So that's Clinton, Essex, Franklin, Jefferson, St. Louis, and Oswego counties. And it became pretty popular, and we had a lot of material. So by 2008, we'd reached 1 million pages. Back a little while longer down the road, in 2012, we partnered with the Rochester Regional Library Council, and we created a website, a second version of the same content, same content system. So it was DT Search, called the Rochester Regional Historic Newspapers. And we added about 250,000 more pages with specific content to Rochester region. It was super popular as well. And the rest of the councils in the ESLN system decided in some way that they wanted to kind of get in on the action, that this was something that was a service for everyone. And so John figured that this was the time to make this a statewide project, to enlarge the goal and purpose across the board. So he ended up working with Michael Beccaria, who was a librarian from Paul Smith College, who took a sabbatical and actually adapted a piece of software from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress has an open source project um, called Chronicling America, and they created a piece of software called Cronam specifically to support that project. So Michael took that Cronam software and adapted it a little bit to meet our needs. And so it was an easy way to on-ramp the contents of our previous historic newspaper sites and roll it into this new piece of software easily. 2013 is also when I joined the staff. My skill set is primarily in Linux and open source. And so it was kind of a natural match that I was here to help launch this project. So in February 2014, we did what we call a soft launch, meaning we turned the site on and we slowly added links to it in various places and people started using it. And so now the New York State Historic Newspaper came to be. So when we talk about the Historic Newspaper Project, it really has three components, three parts, and we're going to talk about all three of those parts here today. The first part of it is the microfilm digitization. By the way, we don't do just newspapers. We've done sheet music, we've done city directories, we've done handwritten notes that were filmed in that way. But newspapers are really our bread and butter, and that's what we know best, but we do lots of other things. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. Online hosting, perpetual online hosting of digitized historical newspapers. Yes, that means that if you have in your drawer of your desk right now, and I can almost see you reaching over to reach into that drawer and grab it. If you have a USB hard drive that has digitized newspaper pages on it, and you've never quite figured out what to do with them, I might have a solution for you. I know you're touching that drive right now, aren't you? You're thinking about it. I can tell. And the third thing that we do is we provide, and this is the most obvious, we provide public access to the website. And we'll talk a little bit about the website today as well. So the first service we're going to talk about is the digitization process. And I'm going to start with the elephant in the room, the part you really came here to find out. What's it going to cost? Well, here's what we do. We charge 15 cents per resultant one-up newspaper page image. So most, if you're familiar with microfilm, especially with newspapers had a tendency to be filmed in 2-up format because they were filmed from the bound books. So what that means is you have two newspaper pages side by side, and I have an illustration of that. And I don't care about those because for us, for our purposes on the website, we only want 1-up pages, okay? So what we do is we charge based on the number of 1-up pages when the whole process is done. And this includes a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So it's 15 cents per 1-up page, and we charge an extra 50 bucks just for the USB drive to send the thing back to you. So what does your 15 cents include? Well, it includes that 2-up to 1-up splitting. It includes minor mass editing edits. And I say minor mass editing because there is no way in the universe that I'm going to, or anyone that works here is going to sit and edit each individual page by hand. It's just not possible. It's a matter of scale. If I'm editing, say, 500 images, great, I could probably do that in an afternoon. If I'm editing 500,000 pages, it's going to take significantly longer. So we can do minor changes to pages, but we do it in mass, meaning we have software that allows us to edit thousands and thousands of pages at a time. The real difficult part of doing digitization, believe it or not, is not the scanning. Film is hard to read, and there's some finesse involved in that. But the part that's really hard in digitization is the date naming and the OCR. So the date naming is important. As it comes off the reel, it's image 001, 002, 003, whatever it happens to be. But we rename those things with the date of that particular page and the issue it came from. And we use a name similar to what you see there, Democratic Union, 1872, February 15th, page 1. And so that's how we label everything, is so that we have a date name associated with every page. Again, makes it easier when routing it into our software for Cronam. The optical character recognition is the other part. So if you're unfamiliar with optical character recognition, here's the brief story. Computers love text, but text is encoded in a particular fashion, meaning a computer doesn't recognize text as being text unless it's coded in a particular way. The trouble with newspaper images are they're pictures, they're not text. And so the optical character recognition is an automated process by which the pixels on the screen that represent words are converted into words that computers can understand as being text. They codes them as such. It's a very, I don't want to say gray or fuzzy process, meaning that OCR is not perfect and probably never will be exactly perfect, no matter how much AI we throw at it. But it's a process that's kind of hard to do. And so the date naming and the optical character recognition are the time-consuming parts of the digitization. So we do those parts. The last thing that you get with your 15 cents per page is we create Adobe PDF with the OCR embedded behind the image of the page. So that makes it a very flexible and easy to use system, meaning your newspaper pages can be used in all sorts of different ways. They can be used right on the desktop. They can be used in a content management system such as Cronam, or you can use them in whatever creative fashion. By the way, the other thing that you're getting for your 15 cents here is that there is no licensing involved on this, meaning that once we create these pages and we turn them over to you, you are free to do whatever you wish with these pages. You want to sell copies to newspapers.com? Have fun. You want to create your own newspaper site? Go for it. Whatever it is you'd like to do with these pages, they're yours to keep after we're done with them. So let's go more into the digitization. Why should you use us as a vendor for the digitization process? And by the way, I've included a vendor list here. When you get a copy of this presentation deck, feel free to follow that link. There are lots of vendors available. Beals and Backstage, Advantage, Hudson Archival. There's all sorts of people across the state and across the country that do this work. Why should you use us? Well, first of all, we're a library organization. We're familiar with your needs. We're not here to make a profit. We're here to make sure that your patrons get access to your materials. We want your stuff online. If your stuff is online and people are using it, that's fabulous. That's the goal. That's what we want from this whole thing. So I like to think that is a plus. We're here to help you. The second reason why you should use us is we have a quote guarantee. So what that means is that if we give you a quote for a particular digitization job, we have an estimation process where we estimate about how many one-up resultant images there might be on a reel of film, and we use that to quote out your number of images. If the number of images that we find on the reels of film that you send us is less than the quote, we only charge you for the actual number of pages. If the number of actual images is greater than the quote, we stick to the quote. We'll only charge you what the quote is. I know that's not unusual, but we really consider this our contribution to your success in your project. In 2021, we contributed about $5,000 worth of labor to people's projects. In 2020, it was over $10,000 worth of labor we contributed to people's projects. So we consider it kind of a badge of honor that we're helping you complete your project. The other reason is I think we're just plain friendly and easy to work with. If you need something from us, reach out, send us an email, give me a call. I'm always happy to talk about digitization and digitization projects, especially if you've got something weird going on. I like to hear about weird projects. That's kind of cool. So please reach out to us, talk to us. I like to think we're friendly. So if I've given you a reason why you should use us, why shouldn't you use us? It's a fair question, right? Well, everybody, and this is an old saying, everybody wants quality, speed, and cost, right? You want good quality, you want something to be done fast, and you want it to be at a good cost. Problem is, you can only ever choose two of those. Well, we've pre-chosen for you. I think our images are of great quality. I think we're of a reasonable cost, but we are not fast. I'll tell you right now, if you're looking for a project where a place to digitize your film where the turnaround is very quick, we may not be your people. The reason for it is because we're literally two people working on this. Myself and my film whisperer and digitization technician, Brenna, are the folks working on this. It's just the two of us. And we have a single Meckel Mac Mini. I added the machine that we use to the slide because I know there's some tech nerds out there that are just going, I wonder what machine they use. Well, it's a Meckel Mac Mini. We love the machine very much. And Brenna is an expert user of it. So there's only the two of us working on this project. The other thing too is that we are on a first come, first serve. So what that means is if on Monday, someone like Buffalo State sends us 100 reels of film to do, and then you send us your 10 reels of film on Tuesday, unfortunately, you're going to wait while we do all 100 reels that are in line ahead of you before we get to your film. It's just a processing, the most fair way that we've discovered to do this processing. So speed for us is always an issue, but if you're willing to wait, then we're all set. So on to the next service. So the digitization is its own thing by itself. We digitize microfilm, that's great. The next service that we offer is actually the hosting of those files on the newspaper website. Now, there's a few things that we need to talk about as far as this goes. If you have that drawer and you've got that hard drive and you've got those digitized files there and you're just trying to figure out what to use them for, we will absolutely host them on the newspaper site for free. The caveat there is that they have to be in a format that we can import with very little work. Okay, and we have listed on the website under /contribute, we have the requirements, and I put them on this slide as well. And so the idea is that if your files meet these requirements, or mostly meet these requirements, we can use them pretty much as is. However, if there's a work that needs to be done, we're going to bounce them back to you and talk to you about that. So say, for instance, you have images, but they're PDFs and there's no OCRing done. Well, that's going to be a problem. We need to have the OCRing available. We'll talk to you about that. If it's something that you can do on your own, great. Take your files back, spend a little bit of time working on them, in which case then come back to us. And when you come back to us, we'll put them right up. That's great. If it's something you don't have the ability to do or the time to do, that's fine. We can do that work for you, but it's going to cost you a little bit of money. Generally about 3 cents per resultant image, depending on what the work is. Most of the time, the more common things that people don't have is the date naming or the OCR. And so those are those two things. That's your primary bit. Those are the things people most often have no ability to do, or a lack of ability to do. If you're uncertain if your files are ready for us, reach out to me and let me know and send us a sample and we'll evaluate it. We'll have a look to see whether or not your images need any work. That evaluation is free. There's no commitment involved in that. Feel free to send along those pages, and that will get you on the road to getting that ready to go. The third service, obviously, is the public access to the website itself. I'm not going to talk about how to use the site today. We have videos available. If you go to the /help, you'll be able to see that. We've done multiple tours of the website and help videos and the like. So I'm not going to talk about the site directly today. Some stats about the site are available here. We have just short of 11.5 million pages. What's cool about that is that behind the Library of Congress, it makes us the largest freely accessible newspaper website other than the Library of Congress. They're larger than we are at the moment, which is really neat. I enjoy being able to say that about the site. I know a lot of people will go, well, what about Fulton postcards? And I don't think he has as many pages as he thinks he does. That's another whole discussion unto itself. But I think that our site is easy to use, generally speaking. It is very popular. We last year had 500,000 users, 13 million page views. It's a big deal. I like it. I think a lot of folks like it. Some interesting things about it. Our earliest title is 1725. Our latest is 2019. We're about to add pages from 2020 as well, which is pretty cool. And we add about 1 million pages per year. And our servers are physically located in St. Lawrence County in Potsdam at our offices. It's kind of a neat project to be running really, truly in New York State. So how can you get involved in this project? Well, one way is obviously to have a digitization project in mind. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a digitization project. If you've done digitization projects before, none of this is going to be a giant surprise. In fact, this is going to be pretty boring, I think, because this is pretty common to what you're doing. So first things up on here is identify a newspaper title that's important to your patrons. Usually this is an easy ask, meaning people go, oh, well, the local newspaper here that's been here since, the 1800s is a wealth of local information that people love. So it's easy to pick out a title. But finding that film might be tricky. Maybe you have the film, maybe your library, your historical society, your museum, you have the film. Maybe not. Maybe your local partner does. The library down the street, the historical society down the street has the film. And maybe you don't have it, maybe they don't have it, but maybe the state library has it. And I've included here a list to where the New York State Library microfilm list is located. The fun part about that list is that we have been doing projects with the New York State Library much more closely in the last few years than we have been, and they've been loaning us film, meaning if you wanted to, you could take a piece of film, request a piece of film, have it sent directly to us. We'll work on it as part of your project and we'll return the film directly to the state library. So you don't even have to necessarily have the film in hand. So it's a really cool thing to think about. The other part of this is identify your date range. Newspapers are a huge, potentially are very huge. And one of the things that I think people like to do is they go, okay, I have the Nowheresville Tattler, and the Nowheresville Tattler, ran from 1800 to 1970. I want to scan the whole thing. And you realize that that's 100 or 200 or 300 reels of film. That gets expensive super fast. And so you really have to break your project down into smaller chunks. One of the chunks that we always recommend is the before 1923 and the post 1923. Before 1923, there's a greater chance that those issues are in public domain, meaning that you can use them without receiving permission from the current publisher or current owner of the title. After 1923 gets a little stickier in that we have to ask you to make a good faith attempt to reach out to the publisher or owner of the paper and ask for permission to put it up. It's one of those things where it's a good faith because there's a lot of titles that between 1923 and today have died and the owner might not be readily apparent. So it's one of those things where before 1923 is easier, right? Post 1923 is a little harder if you're willing to put in the work. So those are, one of the ways that you can limit that date range. Another way that you can limit your date range too is be aware of the title's frequency. And here's what I mean by that. If you want to do everything pre-1923, that's great. But if it's a daily title that ran for, say, 100 years, there are going to be lots more reels of film available than if something was a weekly paper with only like 4 pages that ran for 100 years. So a paper that publishes more frequently is going to have more reels of film. And so you need to kind of narrow in on what reels of film are most important for you in your project, and maybe split it up into chunks. Maybe do a little bit here and a little bit there and do a little bit later on, okay? The third step here on this, we always say, is talk with us about what you're thinking about doing. We have obviously a clear understanding of what's on the site, but we also know what we already have in progress for scanning. Populated areas, Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany, places like that, there are a lot of different organizations who have film and who have sent us material. It's entirely possible that if you're in a big city area, it's possible that you are looking at doing film that someone else has already engaged in or is in the process of engaging in. So reach out to us and talk with us about what you're thinking about doing, and we'll let you know if we've already started it. It's possible it may already be close to being done. You may not have to engage in that project. By the way, I've included at the bottom of the slide here, digitization@nnyln.org. That's our catch-all email address for the digitization project. Feel free to reach out to that email address with any questions you might have. I'm on that email, Brenna's on that email, and my director as well is on that email address. So it's possible and one of the 3 of us will respond to that email. So that's a great email to reach us for this. Once you've got an idea of the project that you want to engage in, the next bit of this is, where do you find money? And this is not a small step. Okay, the first thing you need to do is get a quote from us. Getting a quote from us is free. Let me know how many reels of film you want to do and what the title is you're looking at doing, and I will send back to you a quote, and that will give you a hard, firm number to work from when you start talking about funding with people. It is kind of important. If you ever need that quote adjusted, please reach out to me. Don't feel like you're annoying me. People do that all the time. They'll be like, I want to do 100 reels of this. They get that quote back and realize they're never going to find that money right away. And so they were like, hey, can you requote it for 20 reels? In which case they feel like they're annoying me by asking again. It's fine, absolutely fine. I'll go ahead and adjust that. And then if you decide, oh, maybe not 20, maybe 13 is the right number, in which case, let me know and I'll regenerate the quote. Not a big deal. Once you've got that quote in hand, that allows you to then have the conversation with people about money. And there are a couple of pieces of advice that I have for this. I don't know, and people ask me all the time, hey, Chuck, do you know where I can find money to work on this project? And the answer to that is, heck no, I do not. It's one of those things where people always ask, and I'm always interested to hear what people's creative solutions for finding money have been. But I don't have a lot of advice other than these 2 points. The first point on here is talk to your local ESLN council. They might have grant programs that can provide some money to do this. This is the most common one that I hear. There used to be RBDB grants available. I think RBDB is going away. So it's one of those things that there are other grant programs under different names that are maybe available from your ESLN council. So talk to your ESLN council. They might be able to help you find some funding opportunities, okay? The other thing too my piece of advice is make some local partners if you don't already have some, meaning that college library down the street, that museum, that historical society, that library might be a partner, and they might be able to find some money from their end of the fence, and you might be able to find some money from your end of the fence, and together you might be able to get a lot more done. Reaching out to partner institutions is another one of those big pieces of advice that I get, and we get an awful lot of these, meaning a public library in a little tiny town may not on its own be able to swing doing a digitization project, but them and the local college and the local historical society, well, then they have the guns to be able to get this work done. So be a good neighbor, go find some local partners, and you'll have a much greater chance of doing well on this funding. So the last bit about a digitization project is sending us the film. One of the things that we ask, and again, I keep saying it over and over again, reach out to us before you do the thing, okay? And in this case, before you send us film, reach out to us. And there's a pretty good reason for it. First of all, you may not be sending the film to our office. Sometimes you're shipping it directly to my house. So yes, that means for some of you, you may end up knowing where I live. So if you're in Canton and you want a mean gin and tonic, stop by, I'll hook you up. But because we're not always in the office, depending on COVID, depending on who's working at that particular time, you may end up sending it to me instead of the office. So you have to ask me where to send stuff. The other thing too is we have some great advice about how to pack your boxes. We've seen boxes of film packed in some of the craziest things over the years and packed in some of the craziest ways. We have some advice about how to do that. And we also ask that you include an inventory. That's what to include in the box. So that way, when we open your crazy packing job, we know what's supposed to be there. We also are experimenting right now with the idea of not sending us film. When you're ready to send us film, you let us know, in which case we put you on a waiting list. And when we're ready to have you send us film, we will send you an email and you send us the stuff. This is new to us. Typically, when we get a lot of film, we press pause. We tell people to stop sending us stuff, and then we wait until it comes down a little bit, and then people start sending us film again. Now we're playing with this idea of putting kind of like a waiting line. It's like a reservation at a restaurant. You are reserving a table, and we'll let you know when we're ready for you. So this is new. We'll see how this works. One of the things that I wanted to point out in this project digitization setup is our tracker. We have a piece of software that allows you to log in essentially and look to see where your film is in our workflow. One of the reasons for this is because it used to be, if you wanted to know where your stuff was, you just send us stuff, in which case then we would dive into to doing it. And then if you wanted to know where it was, you had to email us or call us, and it got to be kind of annoying because there would be a lot of people that's all they would do is check it repeatedly. Well, now you have the ability to check yourself, and we love the digitization project tracker for that reason. When you look at the slide deck, I have a hot link so that way you can jump right in and look at those things yourself. If you don't have a project, meaning that you don't have a digitization project ready to go and you just want to be helpful to the cause, one of the things you can do for us is include a link on your website for your users to be able to access us. We ask that you use the full URL. I understand it's very long and very hard to type, which is why you adding your links to your website are super valuable to us. But we also have logo graphics available. So if you want to create a pretty logo link from your website to ours, these are two examples of those. And we have the tools for the New York State Historic Newspaper Project where we keep a lot of that stuff. I'm gonna try jumping out there. Aha, it does work. I love it. So this is the tools page. This is on our website. There are a few things here that I want to point out. First of all, there's logos for the project. So if you want to create a link on your website and you need a nice pretty logo, this is where you can go to find those things. If you see that these are close to what you need for your purposes, but not quite right, let me know and I'll generate a new one, whatever resolution and size that you need. No biggie. Another thing that's really cool about this site is this is the link to where the project tracker is. So you can jump in and have a look at where your project is. And this is where we keep the statistics. And we've been keeping statistics since 2015. So if you want to see how a particular project or a particular newspaper title in a particular region has been performing, this is a great way of doing that. You can actually jump into a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet will give you these are listed by the ESLN councils across the bottom. And then you have, for each of them, the title that had the most page views and how many pages there are of that particular title available. And then you get some stats about that. So the stats are there, so they're available for you to see, but that's again on our tools page. So I'm going to jump back into this. Another way that you can be involved in the project without necessarily sending us film is mention us. Blog posts, newsletters, Facebook feeds, TikTok, whatever the kids are doing these days, mention us in those things as well. I think amongst genealogy circles in some places in the state, we are at the top of people's minds. I think in the North Country especially, genealogists know of us and are super happy and super able to tell people without reservation to jump in. But I think in some other places in the state, we are lesser known. So it's one of those things that if you can mention us to your genealogy people, that would be golden and brilliant. Okay. So I'm going to get to the question and answers. We're doing pretty well on time, I think. So here's some of the ones that were asked before. These are ones that were submitted before we started. How do we add microfilm to the site? I hope we've talked about that. I saw in the question feed a little bit. If you have newspaper pages that are on paper, unfortunately, we're not going to be your people. We digitize from microfilm because we have the equipment and the expertise to be able to do that. When we talk about paper, that's another whole ball of wax unto itself. My suggestion for paper is find folks that do this regularly, whether that be Beals or Backstage or Hudson Archival or those folks. They will help you out. It's just expertise and equipment wise, we're not well configured to handle paper. Make sense? So that's an adjacent question. Another question that was asked is how might you work with two partners, a diocesan archive in Brooklyn and its partner, CRRA, to digitize the Brooklyn table. I apologize, I don't know what the CRRA is, but this is a very common thing where we'll have 2 or 3 organizations get together and be interested in working to get something digitized. Again, it helps if we have a single person who is acting as a coordinator between those organizations. And that way we can kind of customize our communications back and forth with them with that. I hope that kind of sort of answers that question. If not, we can circle back around to it again. How can my students best use the New York State Historic Newspapers? And this is a very complicated question. I am previously a K-6 certified teacher, but I am now more than 20 years out of the classroom. So I'm gonna take some educated stabs at this. In the 3 to 5, grade 3 to 5 area, we kind of recommend that you don't let the kids loose on the website. The reason for it is it's easy to get lost in the amount of material that's there. And I don't think limited reading levels would have an easy time. But if you pull specific articles out of the newspaper site for whatever the topic is that you're working with for local history purposes, and then do question and answer or targeted reading exercises on just the articles that you have pulled out for them to be able to use. That's a possibility that I could see in my mind. Again, I was previously a K6, so that makes a certain amount of sense. In the 6 through 12, again, we don't recommend that you just kind of turn them loose on the newspaper site and hope for the best. I feel like that there's too much material there that would be easy to get lost in. But if you could focus their search a little bit, whether it be a specific topic or a title or a specific time range, even a specific issue, have them look and read a specific issue for whatever the exercise that you are working on, but then also let them read the rest of the newspaper around it. Very often, one of the interesting things about newspaper articles is not necessarily just the newspaper article, but the other things that were in the news around the same time. Yes, there's an article about the opening of the Erie Canal, but what else was going on at the same time that the Erie Canal was being opened? And so the newspaper provides some of that. You know, whatever the local murder mystery is also kind of exciting to read because it adds some context and some flavor to history lessons. So those are some ideas. Like I said, I've been out of the classroom for a while, so this might be some interesting places to continue to focus. What's the current policy on the right to be forgotten? And this one is actually a huge thing on its own that's worth talking about. Our view has always been that newspapers are a public record, and we are not in the business of modifying public record in any meaningful way. Now, that being said, there is an exception to this. If there is content in a newspaper that we feel might be of immediate threat to someone who is currently still alive, we might modify a newspaper. And I only have one example for this. We had a local newspaper from the North Country who were happy to have us be where they keep their historic newspaper archives. And that was great. And we were happy to put the material up. But we discovered that in the 1970s, they had a military column. And the military column was news blurbs about where local people who had joined the military were stationed worldwide. And that was fine. But then they said, as part of the article, if you would like to write to this person, here's how you do that. And it included their name and their military ID and the base they were serving at. In those days, their military ID contained their social security number. And so when we discovered that we were publishing social security numbers of people who were still alive to the internet, we went back to those newspapers and we did modify the newspaper to black out the social security numbers. And we removed from the OCR those social security numbers. But thus far, that has been the only thing that we've removed from newspapers. That being said, one of the things that we get and we understand is that people do stupid things as teenagers, and then they get that published in the newspaper. Say, for instance, you do a little shoplifting as a teenager. As an adult, that might be an issue, and we understand that that might be an issue. So one of the things that we will offer people who have things like that in their past that they would like forgotten is that we will actually modify the search engine indexes and caches for this. So what that means is that if you go to Google and you type your name into Google, Google will not necessarily find your name on our website. That does mean, however, if you went to our website and typed in the name, that information would still be available. So how do we do this? It's a two-step process. Step one is that I go to the robots.txt, which is a special file on the server. And the idea is that when I put a URL in there that I don't want a search engine to follow, I put it in that file and the search engine will delist it on the next time it scans the website in full. That might take some time. So one of the other steps, the second step to this, is I go to Google and I go to Bing. And in those search engines, I will actually remove that URL from their search engine index and their cache, and that takes place immediately. So what that means is that Google will immediately forget that URL exists in their cache, and it will no longer come up in searches. But that ban is temporary, and it only lasts until the next time the robots.txt is parsed for the page and it's re-indexed. So we do eventually permanently remove it, but it takes a little bit of time, meaning from the time that I put in the ban to the time that it completely disappears might be as long as 10 days. People don't like that always, but it's certainly some of the ones that it's a solution such as it is. Most people have been pleased by that, meaning if you committed a little petty larceny as a teenager, we can make it go away from the general Google search. By the way, if you are a person who likes to search for yourself on the internet, make sure that you are using an incognito or a private window to do that search. Most search engines and browsers love to show you stuff that you've already searched for. And so if you've been searching for your name and you're just doing it in a normal open window, it will have a tendency to prioritize searches for you that already contain your name. So be smart, search in the incognito window. Great. So I've gotten to the point where there's probably other questions. I have not been paying any attention to the chat. So Christy, do we have some interesting ones?
We do, and I'm just going to go right in order.
Okay, cool.
Patricia asks, do you have a backup server?
No, mostly because the size and complexity of this is so large that it is hard to replicate, meaning the amount of storage that we have right now, we're occupying around 40 terabytes of storage. And the server is monstrous in its amount of memory and CPU usage. So it nearly doubles our operating costs to set it up somewhere else. I do run really good backups. So it's one of those things where I can restore the site from backup relatively easily. But yeah, that's why we're down every once in a while, is if a piece of hardware fails, I need to replace the piece of hardware. We're down while I swap it out. So
Pat asks kind of a little bit what you've already answered. Her question is, what if you have newspapers that have not been microfilmed, but the actual newspapers, which you answered, in hard copy, and some that have been scanned and are on a hard drive?
I would say reach out to us. Let's see what you have on a hard drive. I would love to see them. Again, it might be something that we can use without too much modification, or there might be some work that still needs to be done on them. But if it's something we don't already have on the website, I'd love to see them.
Melinda asks, do you check to see if you already have the title date range if we reach out about sending USB drives or microfilm to avoid duplications?
We absolutely do. We absolutely do. And I check not just what's on the website, but also what we already have in progress, meaning we might be in the process of digitizing film and you're about to send us files that we already are about to do, in which case that creates let's see what wins. So it's one of those things where if you have files on hard drives, please let us know. We'd love to see them.
Does the site and content play well with screen readers, digital accessibility?
Well, the last time that I checked this, the quick answer to that is not really. The problem comes down to the newspaper. What's the best way of putting this? The contents of the text of the page that are embedded behind the images are loosely arranged physically on the page, but there is no semantic sentence structure put in place, meaning that you can get a screen reader to read the contents of the newspaper page, but they may not necessarily make sentences, meaning it may read left to right across columns and not necessarily down columns, because the OCRing doesn't necessarily contain that information. Some newspapers are better than others, meaning if the text is less dense, then screen readers are okay with it. But I can't guarantee that that's true of everything. So unfortunately, I don't think the accessibility of the individual newspaper pages might be very good.
Thanks, Chuck. Anybody else have any more questions they wanted to add to the Q&A? Go ahead. Otherwise, Rebecca did put in the certificate of attendance request form as well as the evaluation form, and we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you thought of today. Okay, Craig has a comment. I believe Hudson Archival is no longer in business. I was told by a fellow librarian archivist, and also I received no reply from Hudson when I tried reaching out to them.
Well, I get the impression, and I don't know if it's true, that different parts of their business, they kind of sold off to different people. I have talked to Toya since then, but interesting that they have not responded to you. I don't know their status fully, I guess is what it comes down to.
And if anyone has any other questions that come up, feel free to reach out to Chuck. He's accessible via the digitization at nyln.org. And then next month we have the New York State Heritage presentation on the 25th. And that's with Ryan Perry. And so, Rebecca just put a link. So thanks all for joining us on this snowy day. And I hope that you all stay warm and safe and be well. And thanks for coming. Bye.